So I wanted to at least do a bit of a weekend review, even though I wasn't able to make it known my opinions on some of the fights that happened this weekend right after they happened, as I'm normally prone to do. But here goes. Starting off with the explosive, show-stopping knockout of Curtis Stevens by David Lemieux. Very, very impressive win for Lemieux. Very, very impressive knockout. Showed that that power is absolutely real. Incidentally, kind of showed that Golovkin seems to have a much harder chin than he's been kind of given credit for by and large. Albeit, he has a pretty good amount of defense, so we haven't necessarily seen him get hit um, cleanly, particularly often. But Lemieux just took it to Curtis Stevens as soon as the opening bell rang. Backed Stevens straight up against the ropes. Had Stevens kind of standing up straight, and it seemed like Stevens really wasn't ready for Lemieux to start as fast as he did, because Lemieux just pretty much came at him like a freight train and was kind of bobbing side to side, just leaning, putting every ounce of his body into every one of those shots, the left hooks, the right hooks, and he was like, it was almost, it reminded me of like the old Jack Dempsey footage, where he was just going side to side, just rolling heavily into every single shot that he threw, just nasty. Put a hole into your opponent type of damage that he was looking to do against Curtis Stevens, and he eventually managed to make it happen. Stevens did have a nice little run in the middle of the second round, like for about 45 seconds. Managed to catch Lemieux with a bit of a four-piece, like a mix of like a jab, right hand, left uppercut, right hand, and rock Lemieux momentarily. But Lemieux was able to pretty quickly recover from that, and there was a little bit of back and forth action in the second round, especially. But Lemieux, it seemed like he was fully back in control towards the end of that round, and then he kind of carried on control into the third, and he just managed to, in the midst of a combination that Stevens was throwing, he was throwing a left hook, then like a right looping cross hook type of shot. Lemieux kind of bobbed over to his left side, and then, like I just mentioned, he put every bit of his weight into a left hook that just caught Stevens right in between that combination that Stevens was throwing. Stevens had thrown the left, it had kind of grazed off of Lemieux, and the right hand was coming back around, but Lemieux just had the shorter shot. He was like within the distance, like within the range where Stevens' shot probably would have sailed over the back of his head, and he just laid Stevens clean out. Almost knocked him out of the ring. Stevens like arm flied like towards the side, and he wound up actually getting carried out on the stretcher. It appears as though he's okay now, but it definitely was getting very scary there for a second for Curtis Stevens. They had his mom in the audience. They showed her on camera a couple of times. She was looking very concerned. I mean, everybody would definitely be very concerned if you just see somebody get knocked out like that. That was one of the more vicious, violent knockouts that we've probably seen recently. Definitely a candidate for knockout of the year, if not the knockout of the year, period, point blank. Definitely. Yeah, to me, it's pretty much going back and forth between that one and Mikey Garcia versus Dejan Zlaticanin at the moment. If anything, I might give Garcia Zlaticanin the slight edge because of the fact that it was a championship level fight. Especially Garcia, with his overall chops in terms of formerly being on the pound for pound list. Maybe not now because he's been so inactive the last few years, but definitely showed a lot of talent in that fight. But Stevens and Lemieux, I mean, just the violence and the sheer force of that knockout. I remember a few years back, Edison Miranda had gotten knockout of the year over, I think it was David Banks was the man's name that he had knocked out. He managed to get a knockout of the year, and that wasn't a fight necessarily at the highest level, but just the way Miranda laid him out was just so graphic that it's like it couldn't be denied, basically. So I could potentially see that happening with this particular knockout. So with that, Lemieux, it appears as though he's pretty much back in contention as a middleweight contender. Him versus the likes of like Billy Joe Saunders, I think would be pretty solid. You got Jermall Charlo, who just moved up to middleweight, although I'm sure Charlo's probably aiming at the likes of a Golovkin or the Golovkin-Jacobs winner. I should be more exact with regard to that. Or who knows, maybe Charlo might go after Saunders himself. You got Avtandil Kurtseeds facing a tough opponent in a couple. He's actually ranked number one in WBO for Billy Joe Saunders. Him versus Lemieux, I think, would be a fantastic fight. Really a good test for Kurtseeds to see if he's ready really for that next upper echelon top level, because like Lemieux is almost like the perfect gatekeeper, I think, for Golovkin. Because I mean, if you can beat him and if you could either make him miss frequently enough or take his power, I think that would, and also defeat him, I think that would, at the very least, say some good things about a given fighter in relation to their readiness to fight at the championship level against somebody like a Golovkin. But that's it for that one. I wanted to go on to Yuriorkis Gamboa versus Rene Alvarado, and honestly, I think a lot of people are probably being a little bit overly critical of Gamboa's performance against Alvarado. I think a lot of people were looking for him to just light Alvarado up like he did to like Rogers and Mtagwa, or like some of the other fighters that he's fought in the past. You know, some of his early ESPN Fighting Night fights and HBO fights where it's like he was just blitzing guys just with punches and bunches and destroying them, just taking them completely apart within a few rounds. Like just somebody just going wilding out on somebody, you know, just punches from all angles, very fast, fast feet, fast hands, just all action. You know, Sugar Ray Leonard in an aggressive stance type stuff. But I mean, against Alvarado, I knew that it was going to be a tough test, especially because Alvarado has never really been like beat up, beat down. He has been outboxed before. You know, he has losses to the likes of Joseph Diaz Jr., you know, the current top featherweight contender. But outside of that, I mean, he had ran pretty much everybody really close. He ran Rocky Juarez close a few years ago. You know, former multi-time title challenger, even though he never won a championship, he was definitely at that championship level. And I mean, he's just a tough guy altogether, a gritty guy that, you know, if you go in there trying to knock him out, you could get hurt very badly. And there was a couple of times where Gamboa was hurt. He actually even got dropped towards the end of the fight. Gamboa also dropped Alvarado, although it was called a slip. But, you know, Alvarado's one of those guys that you can't just go in there and wild out against, because you might get hurt very badly, might get dropped, might get stopped. So Gamboa, you know, kind of played it a little bit closer to the chest. But, you know, he has been out for a long time, and I think this was really a fight meant to gauge exactly where he's at in terms of his comeback. You know, exactly how fast they're going to progress him to getting the title shot. If they're going to go in his next fight, or if they're going to, you know, have maybe two more tune-up fights, and then boom, he'll be ready for the likes of Miguel Berchelt, Lomachenko, Davis, Corrales, etc. But just, I mean, looking the way that he looked, he won conclusively. He did a pretty solid job, in spite of the fact that he did get caught a couple of times. But, you know, like I said, Alvarado is a guy that, you know, he's gritty, he's rugged, he's ready to punch when you're throwing punches. You know, he's not afraid to engage. And, you know, he's just a very difficult opponent, you know, a taller opponent as well. You know, long reach and good overall skills and good overall abilities, even though he's not an elite, like, champion level fighter. He's the type of guy that nobody really has an easy night against altogether. So Gamboa did a solid job, I thought. If anything, maybe one or two more fights, and then he'll probably be ready for a title shot. It looks like they were kind of trying to lead on the possibility of him versus Takashi Miura. I'm not sure if Miura is going to get a shot at Berchelt anytime soon, or if they might make the Miura versus Salido fight sometime in the near future. But I think any of those fights, Miura or Salido, would be solid fights for Gamboa. You know, of course, Gamboa fought Salido years ago, managed to defeat him, but he did get dropped twice in that fight. And I actually think that would still be a pretty damn solid fight. You know, Salido has managed to keep himself at that high level ever since then. Knocked out Juanma Lopez, knocked out Orlando Cruz, defeated Vasyl Lomachenko, and he's just still at a very high level. You know, he ran Francisco Vargas very close, got the draw against Vargas, arguably could have won that fight. So, I mean, I could very well see maybe have one more quote-unquote easy fight for Gamboa, then somebody like a Miura, and then at that point I think he'll probably be ready for the title. Or they might just go to Miura right away, and if he beats Miura with relative ease, so to speak, he might be back right in the mix against the champions that I already mentioned. But you know, I just thought he did a solid job overall. You know, for a comeback fight after as long of a layoff as he's had, and you know, he's even at 35 years of age. You know, he still looks pretty fresh. You know, still has the quick feet, still has the quick hands, still has the overall skills and ability, still has pretty good timing. But you know, it's really just a matter of the opponent. You know, sometimes you'll fight some opponents that'll make you look bad. Sometimes you'll fight opponents that make a lot of people think, give them a false sense of you being more worn down or more aged than they otherwise would expect. But that's pretty much what I got to say about Gamboa and Alvarado. And I wanted to move on to Juan Francisco Estrada, who had a good fight this weekend against Anwar Salas. And I mean, Estrada, it was a classic Estrada performance. Much better performance than Estrada's last fight, where he was fighting a guy that had been stopped a couple times in Raymond Tabugan, and I think a lot of people were expecting Estrada to stop him as well. Estrada wound up going to a 10-round decision, won every single round, won every second of every round in that fight, but at the same time, he didn't necessarily light the world on fire, and it wasn't looking like Estrada necessarily had the power that he used to have, especially because of the fact that he kept breaking his hand, and I know that his right hand has been like a real ailment. Like I saw a picture of it recently, like even, and it looked like hell. Like it looked like somebody took a damn sledgehammer to it. It looked like that scene from Casino where broke the guy's fucking hand for cheating in the blackjack game. But here against Anwar Salas, did a solid job. Won every round, was ratcheting off just the beautiful combinations that we've known Estrada to have. He's still a young guy as well, only 26, and I mean he did a fantastic job against Salas. Salas did manage to land a couple of right hands over the top in the first round, but once Estrada was able to find the rhythm, finding the timing, he pretty much shut Salas down completely in a defensive manner and was just counterpunching beautifully. Just some of the most beautiful counterpunching combinations that we've seen since Juan Manuel Marquez, and did a solid job of knocking him out in the fifth round. Took him out with a mean body, took him down first with a mean body shot to the left. Salas managed to get up, but then Estrada basically finished him with an overall flurry and then a right hand to the body. Hurt him to the body, hurt him to the head. Estrada definitely still looks like a top level operator, even at super flyweight. The new weight class that he's managed to join up there, even alongside Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And of course, Janriel Casimiro, the former IBF flyweight champion, has now joined them as well. And super flyweight is a packed division, man. A very, very packed division. You got Roman Gonzalez, you got Naoya Inoue with the WBC and the WBO championships respectively. You got Carlos Cuadras, who's going to be fighting Cesar Ketso Rungvisai. That's Cesar Ketso Rungvisai is going to be fighting Roman Gonzalez this weekend, the former WBC champion versus the current one. Carlos Cuadras is going to be fighting David Carmona this weekend, and that's Carmona is the first man to take Naoya Inoue 12 rounds and give him his toughest fight to date. So if Cuadras is able to beat him impressively, that might raid Cuadras even higher than Inoue potentially. So I mean, you got the likes of those guys. Then you got the WBA champion Khalid Yafai, a very solid fighter, managed to cleanly defeat Luis Concepcion, a normally very impressive fighter in his own right. IBF champion Joanna Cajas, who managed to defeat fairly handily McJoe Arroyo, who I didn't expect for him to win that fight as clearly as he was able to do. It was a fairly close fight, a competitive fight, but Cajas definitely got the decision. Definitely deserved it. Then you also have the likes of, as I mentioned before, Janriel Casimiro is up in there. Estrada is now there as well. And Estrada, I think, could very well potentially beat any of the aforementioned names. It'll be interesting to see exactly who he steps up against next in the super flyweight division. Arroyo is still out there, of course, as well. You got the likes of Felipe Orocuta, a little bit of a lesser-known guy, but a very solid fighter nonetheless. Then you have the likes of Rex Cho, who actually just recently fought this past weekend as well. Had a good knockout victory over Hirofumi Makai, a guy who was incidentally one of his only other knockouts was to Cesar Ketso Rungvisai. And Rex Cho, and then Jamie Conlon, who of course had a bit of a controversial decision over Yadir Cardoza, a very close fight, and he was very lucky to get out of that fight with a win instead of a loss. But Rex Cho and Jamie Conlon are the number 1 and number 2 contenders for Naoya Inoue's WBO belt. I honestly think that Inoue probably takes both of them out. I think he knocks both fighters out, which isn't to say that they're terrible fighters. It's just that they're not at that level, and it goes to show that I think the super flyweight division might be one of the most packed divisions in the entire sport. I think it's right up there with the super featherweight division, up there with the welterweight division in terms of just overall quality at the top level. Just a number of really, really good fighters who you can mix and match them, and you never know what may happen. And just kind of thinking about it, I think super flyweight might just be the most packed division in terms of that. But that's pretty much it for my overall weekend review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to try and do some previews for this coming weekend. But that's all for this one, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.